Hi, welcome to Pyrography Made Easy. I'm Brenda. In this tutorial episode, I'm going to show you how to create the Bobcat artwork. Some of you have been leaving comments asking me to slow down the tutorials and show more real-time burning. I did that with this video, and I thank you for the feedback. Let me know what you think. Did I do enough of it? Should I do more? Well, let's create some pyrography artwork. Use a pencil eraser to remove some of the graphite on the whiskers. Use a writer pen tip on low heat and burn over the whisker lines. Press the pen tip firmly into the wood so it leaves deep, narrow channels along the whiskers. Using a low heat setting will allow the pen tip to penetrate the wood easier without adding any color to the wood. If there is still some graphite, use the sharp point of a knife, like the tip of an X-Acto knife, to scrape along the whisker line and remove it. Use a writer pen tip to burn in the trace lines around the eye. Switch to a shader pen tip and burn over the remaining trace lines so that they are a light tan color. Make sure to keep the trace lines pale in color, as it will be a lot easier to blend them in with the fur. Also, burn the lines in the same direction that they were drawn on the pattern. The lines on the pattern indicate the growth direction of the fur, and it's important that the lines match the growth direction so that you have realistic looking fur. Darken up the eye to the left of the iris. Also, darken up along the top and the right edge of the eye. Reburn along the bottom of the eyebrow hairs using the razor edge of the shader. Reburn along the pattern lines on the eyebrow. Then darken up the inner corner of the eye. Rotate the board and darken up the bottom right of the iris. Then burn along the bottom of the eye, keeping the pen tip in optimal position while you do so. Burn the top portion of the iris to a brown color, and then lightly burn over the lower portion of the iris. Continue to burn in the trace lines, making sure to burn them in the same direction as what was drawn on the pattern. Keep the lines in a light tan color range. Erase the pencil lines on the wispy ear hairs and redraw them in using a white charcoal pencil. Do not use a colored pencil for this step. Colored pencils will melt and char under the heat of the pen. Now always start the hair on the ear and extend the line outwards towards the background. Use a shader pen tip to burn in the background behind the ear hairs. Burn carefully so that you avoid the charcoal lines. The charcoal will resist the heat of the pen, but it won't block it completely. Use the razor edge of the shader to burn short, dark lines along the top of the head. Make sure to burn the lines on the background. You can extend the line slightly onto the cat's head, but the majority of the line should be on the background. These lines will give a jagged look to the area, and it creates the little bits of hair sticking up here and there. After you burn in the short dark lines, then create a buffer zone by burning a dark brown to black colored band that's around 1/4 inch or 0.64 centimeters wide. Rotate the wood if needed and darkly burn along the edge of the ear. Make sure to erase the white charcoal as we don't need it anymore. Burn dark tan pull-away strokes along the base of the left ear. Start the stroke on the base of the ear and pull it up and curve it gently towards the ear hairs. Then burn the top of the ear to a dark tan color. Burn more pull-away strokes on the ear, but this time start the stroke at the point where the other strokes ended. Pull the stroke towards the ear hairs and let a few of the strokes extend all the way to the end of the hairs. Make sure to vary the color just a little with these strokes. This will give the impression of different colored hairs and layers of hair in the ear. Reburn along the base of the wispy hairs until the area is a dark tan to light brown in color. Now we are going to create a buffer zone around the cat. Begin by burning short dark lines on the background next to the outer edge of the cat's face. Then darken up approximately 1/4 of an inch or 0.64 centimeters of the background to a dark brown or black color. The purpose of the buffer zone is to allow us to burn in the background faster. The reason is that we won't have to get close to the cat when we start burning, so we can have the heat a little bit higher and move our hand a little faster. This section of the fur is in shadows, but it can still be seen against the background. So burn the fur between this set of whiskers to a dark tan color. Then resume working along the edges of the fur. Avoid burning on the whiskers. Shift the direction of the short lines to a more horizontal position when working along the back of the neck. With about every third line on the pattern, burn a dark line above and below this line. This is very similar to how we burned in the wispy ear hairs. We're just not using white charcoal. After you've burned in the short dark lines, then create the buffer zone. Burn dark lines just below the pattern lines along the bottom of the fur patch to create a transition zone. The transition zone is where the fur ends and the shadows begin. Below the transition zone is in dark shadows, so burn it to the background color. Create a transition zone above the next fur patch, and then burn the rest of the area to the background color. Burn in the back half of the ear's cast shadow to the background color. Leave the top right edge of the ear 1 to 2 shades lighter than the background. This will allow the edge to be slightly noticeable against the background, but keep it to a very subtle color difference. The rest of the cast shadow should be burned to a dark brown or black color. Create transition zones around any fur patches that you encounter and burn the rest of the area to the dark brown or black color of the background. Rotate the wood and burn along the left edge on the back of the ear. The color should be very dark on the left edge, but fade slightly as you near the right edge. Leave a wide area around the ear flap, or whatever this thing is, unburned, and we will work on that later on. Finish burning in the dark shadows around the fur patches. Make sure to create transition zones as needed around any fur patches you encounter. We're going to burn in the first fur patch, but first let me show you a demo on zigzags. A zigzag is literally a line burned in a back and forth or zigzag motion. I refer to each individual zigzag as a zigzag burst. Each burst has between 3 to 7 lines on it. You want to vary the number of lines and how long the lines are in each burst. Also, vary the distance or the gap between the lines in the burst. Now I'm starting to burn a zigzag patch, which is simply a group of zigzag bursts. The important thing is to vary where you start each burst in the patch. Seriously, it is really important to vary the starting point of each zigzag. This is one of the key components to creating realistic fur using my zigzag method. What you absolutely do not want to do is burn long rows or bands of zigzags. This does not even remotely look like fur, so avoid doing this. Don't burn bands or rows of zigzags. In this portion of the demo, I am using the flat of the shader to burn zigzags. Notice how wide or thick the lines are on each zigzag. To me, the lines are too thick to look like hair. Now I've angled the pen tip so that I am using just the razor edge of it at the end. The lines are much thinner and a lot closer to looking like hair. In addition to using the razor edge of the pen tip, it is also important to use a light hand pressure when burning. The razor edge of the tip tends to dig into the wood surface, so using a light hand pressure will help minimize this from happening. For this zigzag patch, I am using a heavy hand pressure. And I'll be honest, I'm having problems burning more than 1 or 2 lines on each burst. While it's probably hard to see on the screen, the pen tip is really digging deep into the wood surface, and that is what's preventing me from really burning good zigzag bursts. I'm going to add a second layer of zigzags to the patches. This patch was created using light hand pressure, and it's the same pressure I'm using for the second layer on it. And I'm not experiencing any difficulties during this burn process. I'm having a lot of difficulty adding a second layer to this patch. I'm not adding any additional texture or tonal depth because the pen tip keeps falling into the deep lines from the first burn. Here's a comparison of the two burns. The left burn, created using heavy pressure, doesn't look very good. This portion of the demo I would consider as a realistic example of zigzag burns. I'm using light pressure and I'm just using the razor edge of the shader to burn the lines. As a result, the lines are nice and thin. Each zigzag burst starts in a different spot. Also, the number of lines and the space between the lines varies, as does the length of the lines in each burst. When I add a second layer of zigzags, the overall color of the patch increases, but there is still a lot of tonal variation. Each layer of zigzags adds to the texture and the tonal depth of the patch, and this is what helps create that realistic fur look. I want to point out that the second layer of zigzags is burned just like the first, so each burst needs to start in a different spot. You need to vary the number of lines in each burst, and also vary the distance between the lines and how long the lines are in each burst. These rules apply to every single layer that you do on your patch. Usually I will burn 3 to 5 layers of zigzags on a patch of fur. The last thing I want to cover is the need to burn zigzags in the growth direction of the fur. For this eye example, you will not get realistic results if the zigzags were all burned in the same direction. As the fur changes direction, you need to angle the zigzag burst to match that direction. You start gradual And as you work your way further in the new direction, you continue to change the angle to match it. This burn started out vertical when I was burning on the nose, but the direction changed to an almost horizontal angle when I was working above the eye. So let's repeat this process and work on the under part of the eye. Again, as I work on the nose area, the burn direction is almost vertical. But once I head towards the eye, the angle changes, slanting slightly to the left. As I work along the lower portion of the eye, the burn angle continues to increase to match the fur growth direction. At the left corner of the eye, the zigzags are burning in an almost horizontal direction. When you are working on fur, pay close attention to the direction the fur is growing and make sure your burn strokes match that direction. To contour or give shape to an area, just reburn as needed. In this example, I am reburning along the right corner of the eye. This makes the corner look recessed or sunken down from the fur on the nose. Make sure when reburning that all of the strokes continue to follow the growth direction of the fur. Okay, so here are my last tips to help you get good burn results. First, make sure your board is ultra smooth. Sand it, wet it, let it dry, sand it again. Secondly, use a light hand pressure. The pen tip is already going to dig into the wood, so using a hard or heavy hand pressure is not going to make that any better. And lastly, keep the heat set between low and medium. The higher the heat, the more the pen wants to dig into the wood. I sped up the first little bit of the video as the camera wasn't focusing well. Now we are in real time. With this first patch of fur, we are going to fill the area with zigzag bursts. As you burn, remember to use light hand pressure and vary where you start each burst. Also, make sure to vary the number of lines and the space between the lines in each burst. Keep the heat set so that you get a tan burn result. A lower heat will help prevent the razor edge of the pen tip from digging into the wood. With the shader that I am using and the fact that I'm burning on basswood, my burner unit is set really close to 3.0. It goes up to 10. And as you can see, my zigzags are being burned to a very light tan color. I purposely am not burning dark. The reason is that burning pale allows me to burn more layers of zigzags without the fur getting too dark. More layers means the fur has a lot more tonal depth and texture to it. This creates the realism that I'm after. Now, reburn over the patch and cover it with another layer of zigzag burst. Again, you want to vary where you start each burst. In fact, all of the rules or guidelines that we used during the first layer apply to the second layer and each layer after that. As you can see, there isn't a huge difference between the first and second layer of zigzags. Add a third layer of zigzags to the fur patch. As you can see, I've rotated the board and I'm burning zigzags from a different direction. I suggest you try burning at a different direction too, just to see if one way is easier than another. There is one slight addition to this step and that is to reburn over the transition zone. I used a combination of zigzags and some single lines to do this. Notice how I start the single lines in the transition zone and pull them into the fur patch. Finish applying the third layer of zigzags to the patch. Here is a comparison photo, and you can see how the fur patch is gradually getting darker and richer in tonal depth. Apply a fourth layer of zigzags to the patch. As you can see, each layer increases the overall darkness level of the fur patch. Now you might need to increase the heat setting on your burner just slightly. For example, I had my unit set at 3.0 and I increased it to 3.1 or 3.2. This patch of fur is in the shadows, so it still needs to be darkened up some more. That means we will burn another layer of zigzags over the patch, and if you are counting, this is the fifth layer. Again, follow the rules or guidelines for this layer that were used on the previous four. Vary where each burst starts, vary the number of lines in each burst, vary the gap between the lines in each zigzag burst, and use a light hand pressure to keep the pen tip from digging in too deeply. Leave this spot a few shades paler than the rest of the fur patch. Here's a composite photo showing the difference between the fourth and fifth layers of zigzags. Now it is time to contour or give shape to the fur patch. The top of the patch along the right edge is the darkest area on this patch, so that is the first place to start adding shadows. I'm using zigzags and I've slowed down my hand speed. Also, I'm concentrating on filling the pale gaps in the fur near that lower edge so that they are brown instead of tan in color. I'm also burning single strokes to burn in some of those small gaps. I'm working small sections at a time, reburning them until the darkness level is where I think it should be. Then I move on to a different section. My goal with the fur on the neck is to create the impression of realistic fur, but I did not try to replicate every detail on the reference photo. No one is going to examine your artwork that closely on the neck. All you really need to do is just create the general impression of fur. Now that said, I do consult with the reference photo to get the general shape and the shadow placement correct. Checking the reference photo tells me I need to darken up the end or the right edge of this fur patch. I also need to darken around the sunlit spot on the patch. And lastly, there is a slight depression on the neck before the sunlit patch that needs a touch more color. Our second patch of fur has slightly longer hairs on it. Begin by darkening up the transition zone along the top and left edge of the patch. Then start filling the patch with long, thick tan lines. Use the flat of the shader and start the line in the transition zone and pull it into the fur patch. Vary the length and the color of the lines. Darken up the lower transition zone. Add more long tan lines on the fur patch using the flat of the shader to do so. We want thick lines, so that's why we're not using the razor edge. Notice how the lines curve, and they curve in slightly different ways. When burning the tan lines, it's important to incorporate variety into the burn. This is similar to the zigzags, in that it takes several layers of lines to build up the color and texture of the fur patch. Now that the patch has a layer of tan lines, let's build up the color around the edges of the patch. Mostly I use single lines to do this, and I varied the darkness and the color of them. I also use some zigzags. The overall goal is just to darken the area, but to do so in a way that keeps the impression of hair or fur. The bottom right side of the patch is in shadows, so the color needs to be dark in this area. The lower portion of the patch is darker than the top. Create a jagged or irregular transition between the two areas. Then darken up the lower portion of the patch by adding another layer of thick lines. Use the flat of the shader and vary the length and the color of the lines. Cover the upper portion of the patch with zigzag bursts. Use the razor edge of the shader for this and follow the rules or guidelines that were used during the creation of the first patch. Continue to reburn on the patch and build up the dark areas on the fur. Use a combination of zigzags and single strokes to do this. Make sure to keep a lot of tonal variation in the fur. Also, make sure to work on the transition zone. Leave several hairs visible in the transition zone, but they should be just single hairs here and there. Now it's time to create the pale hairs in the fur. This is done by carefully burning around pale lines on the patch. Random pale lines are formed during the process of applying layers of color. Look at the patch and seek a pale line in it. Then emphasize that line by burning darker around it. Make sure to keep the lines semi-long or about double the length of the short fur on the first patch. Notice how I'm burning dark single lines around the pale line that I want to emphasize. Take your time and remember that all you need to do is create the general impression of fur, as no one is going to pay that much attention to the fur along the neck. Darken up the transition zone. Use the razor edge of the shader and start burning zigzag burst on the area. Now I'm going to warn you that I lost a little video for this fur patch, but you can handle this. Treat this patch the same way that we did the first fur patch. Burn multiple layers of zigzags to build up the color. Vary where you start each burst and the number of lines in each zigzag burst. Also, vary the gap between the lines in each burst. Examine the reference photo and pay attention to the general shape and shadow placement on this fur patch. Looking at the reference photo, I noticed that there is a cast shadow line running through the fur patch. Also, there is a sunlit spot of fur just above that cast shadow line, so the fur is darker both above and below that sunlit spot. Keep those things in mind as you work on this fur patch. Darken up the area around the last fur patch using the shader of your choice, and burn the area to a dark brown or black color. Also create the transition zone around the last fur patch. The last patch of fur on the neck is very similar to the first one. Begin by applying a layer of zigzag burst over the patch using the razor edge of the shader. Follow the rules or guidelines laid out in the demo. Vary the starting point of each burst. Vary the number of lines in each burst. Vary the gap between the lines in each burst, and use a light hand pressure when burning. The lower portion of this fur patch is in shadows, so it needs to be a few shades darker than the upper portion. I want to point out that I didn't adjust the heat setting on my burner for this. Instead, I slowed down my hand speed, and this gave me a darker burn result. So continue to burn zigzags on this patch of fur. The lower right corner of this patch is in shadows, so burn it to a dark brown or black color. Notice how I'm creating some long pale hairs. I'm using the same process that we used during the second fur patch. Now I want to mention that it is completely up to you if you want to include long hairs in this patch or not. You can easily fill it with short fur that is created using zigzags, and it will look just fine. Reburn over the patch to darken it up. I am using a combination of zigzags and single short dark lines to do this. Now create a few small spots or small areas of really dark fur. Well, actually, we're creating the small shadowed spaces in the fur. If needed, reburn to darken up the lower right corner. Then create more pale long hairs along the bottom and the right edge of this patch. Keep in mind that if you are going to fill the area with short fur, you can ignore what I'm doing. During this section of the video, I'm pausing a lot as I consult with the nearby reference photo. Normally I cut these out from the video. I left them in just to give you an idea of how often I examine the reference photo. Also, notice how I lift the pen tip up and away from the wood when I pause burning. Lastly, darken up the right edge of this patch just a little bit more and we're all done. Burn the background to a dark brown or black color. If your whiskers got a little charred, then clean them up by scraping along the lines using the tip of a sharp knife like an X-Acto knife. I want to mention that I didn't clean up the brow whiskers as they don't stand out as much, they're not quite as bright white, so I left them a little charred. Finish burning the background to the dark brown or black color. Begin by burning a combination of short single lines and small zigzag bursts along the inner corner of the eye. Darken up the right edge of the corner next to the white streak. Continue to apply a layer of zigzags following the contour of the cheek, working your way down to the whiskers. Make sure to burn the zigzags in the fur growth direction, and also vary where you start each zigzag burst. Use a light hand pressure while you work, as this will help keep the pen tip from digging into the wood. Use the flat of the shader to darken up the dot near the nose. I held the pen tip in place for a half second or so to get a really dark burn result. Continue to apply a layer of zigzag burst on the face between the corner of the eye and the whiskers. Also, follow the rules for burning zigzags as explained during the demo. There are two very important things you must do to get realistic results. First, vary where you start each burst, and second, burn the zigzag burst in the growth direction of the fur. Darken the dot above the corner of the eye, then burn under the brow near the corner of the eye. Make sure to burn it to a dark tan color. Add a layer of zigzags around the area immediately surrounding it. Apply a layer of zigzags to the bridge of the nose. Make sure to follow the fur growth direction as you work in this area. The inset photo has yellow arrows drawn on it showing the direction the fur is growing. The face is a lot more complex than the fur on the neck. There are a lot of markings, shadows, and contouring that needs to be done. Because of this, I don't apply a uniform layer of zigzags over the entire area like I did with the neck patches. The reason is that I don't want to lose my guidelines for the markings and the shadows. So you'll see that I often reburn in small areas to build up the color of the markings and the shadows. Resume burning zigzags on the bridge of the nose, following the fur growth direction as you work. Reburn on the shadowed area underneath the brow. Then work your way up, adding a layer of zigzags to the brow marking. Reburn along the left edge of the marking, adding some single short dark lines on it. Now burn a layer of zigzag burst starting under the white streak below the eye. Extend the layer of zigzags down to the cheek. Reburn around the lower white streak on the bobcat's cheek. I am using a combination of zigzags and single strokes for this. Reburn the fur along the corner of the eye. Make sure to add lines along the left edge so that it is a little jagged. Continue to reburn downward, following the curve of the cheek to darken up this area. Apply another layer of zigzags along the side of the nose. Darken up the fur below the dark spot near the nose. Now darken up the nostril. Make sure to keep your pen tip in optimal position when working along the edges. Fill the center to a dark brown or black color. Rotate the board and burn along the bottom of the nostril. Darken up around the base of the whiskers in the top row. Continue to build up the shadows between the whiskers and the white streak above it. Reburn under the white streak. Also add a few single tan lines in the streak. Then burn some single brown lines along the right edge of the face to make it a little more jagged in appearance. Burn in the first row of dark markings on the jaw. I used zigzag strokes for this, but I didn't leave any gaps between the lines on the zigzags. Add more short, dark lines or dashes on the fur above the white portion on the jaw. Finish burning in the first row of dark markings on the jaw. Reburn around the dark spot near the nose to darken up the area. Begin adding a layer of zigzags to the side of the face. Do not burn uniform layers of zigzags on the face like we did with the neck fur. The reason is that you will lose the guidelines for the markings and the shadows on the face. Instead, do what I've been doing and burn in the markings and the shadows as you encounter them. They do not have to be their final darkness level, but you do need them to be dark enough to be able to see them or distinguish them from the rest of the fur. Reburn the shadow spot under the brow. Also burn a layer of zigzags on the brow, extending the color to the thin marking on the left. Then burn in that thin marking on the brow. Reburn over the dark spot on the brow. Next, add some dark tan lines to the top portion of the white marking that is located to the left of the eye below the brow. Also add some brown lines to the bottom of the streak above the brow. Burn in the rest of the thin dark markings on the brow and add a layer of zigzags to the area around the markings. Add another layer of zigzag burst to the bridge of the nose, making sure to follow the fur growth direction. Burn in both the pale streak above the corner of the eye and the darker streak to the right of it. The center of the pale streak is the lightest spot on this marking, so make sure to burn fewer lines in the center of this marking. Burn the marking above the eyebrow to a dark tan color. Mostly I use single lines in this area. Also, add some short single lines to the eyebrow. Darken up the shadow under the right edge of the eyebrow. Then darken up the marking that starts near the side of the eyebrow. Finish burning in the marking above the eyebrow. Add a few brown lines in the lower half of this marking. Add a few tan lines to the white marking above the eyebrow. Then darken up the right edge of the marking. Apply a layer of zigzags above the eye. Burn upward to the top of the marking following its curve and making sure you burn in the growth direction of the fur. Extend the zigzag layer to the right and reburn over the white streak above the eyebrow. Burn in the marking on the side of the face, reburning as needed to build up the color. Add a layer of zigzags to the right of the marking. Continue to burn along the side of the face, adding zigzags to the unburned areas on it. Then reburn as needed to build up the color along the shadows and the markings found in this area. Make sure to work along the shadowed right edge to build up the color and intensify the shadows on this jagged edge. Reburn along the markings on the side of the face. Reburn near the top whisker to darken the shadows and to darken up the marking above the whisker. Darken up the first row of markings on the jaw. Darken up the shadows along the top of the whiskers. Then burn in the next row of dark markings on the jaw. Reburn over the deeply shadowed area on the jaw. Burn in the third row of dark markings on the jaw. Start on the last row of markings and darken up around the whiskers on the right side. Go slow with the last row of jaw markings. Burn carefully around the numerous whiskers in this area. Add a few dark lines under the top portion of the jaw. Then work your way to the right, burning in the shadows on the lower jaw. I am burning single lines for the shadows. Use the flat of the shader to burn over the shadowed chin. The flat of the shader will allow the pen tip to glide over the embossed whiskers, revealing their location. Add a layer of light tan zigzags under the nose. Then add a layer of light tan zigzags to the chin to give it some texture. Next, burn some short, dark lines along the outer edge of the chin to increase its jagged appearance. Reburn the shadowed portion of the lower chin to darken it up. During this reburn, make sure to burn single lines and zigzags so the chin looks furry. Make sure to avoid burning on the whiskers. The shadows are darker just below the upper jaw, and they fade in color by several shades near the bottom of the jaw. So as you burn, make sure to replicate this. Add some lines in the tan color range along the white portion of the upper jaw to give it some texture. Concentrate the lines along the edges of the markings. Burn along the lower right edge of the nose. Then burn very short, dark lines or dashes along the upper edge of the nose. Afterwards, finish burning in the nose using the flat of the shader. I use circular motion to burn in the nose as I wanted a very subtle color variation or texture on the nose. Switch to a writer pen tip and add a layer of tiny dots over the nose. The dots are only 1 to 2 shades darker than the color of the nose. The dots will increase the overall darkness level of the nose, and they will add very subtle texture to the nose. Make sure to add more dots along the edges of the nose where it is slightly darker. Switch back to a shader pen tip and reburn along the right edge and along the bottom of the nose. Add a layer of short dark lines between the white streak and the whiskers on the right corner of the jaw. Reburn along the side of the nose and on down to the whisker. Add some short dark lines or dashes on the fur. Also, reburn the fur under the white marking. Burn some light tan lines over the white streak under the eye. Burn quite a few lines around the edges of the streak. Then do the same thing with the white streak that is next to the corner of the eye. The purpose is to add a little texture to the fur and to break up the line that is around these patches or streaks. Burn in the rest of the markings on the brow and add a layer of zigzags to the surrounding area. Reburn as needed to build up the color and the tonal depth in this area. Work your way up the brow to the forehead. Keep the reference photo nearby to determine which markings are dark. There is a fairly large dark patch on the forehead, so make sure to burn that so that it is several shades darker than the nearby fur. The top of the head is slightly shadowed, so it is a bit darker than the brow area. The left side of the head is a touch darker than the right, plus there are numerous markings in this area. So take your time as you work and consult the reference photo often. I have found that when working in complex areas like the forehead with its numerous markings, it helps to burn in the dark markings first. They are easy to match up with the reference photo, and if you accidentally reburn over them, it just won't matter. Continue to burn in the markings on the forehead and reburn the markings on the brow. The video may seem a little jerky as I have cut out the numerous times I paused burning while I was consulting with the reference photo. I highly recommend that you frequently consult with the reference photo while you are working on this project. And be sure to lift the pen tip up and away from the wood when you are pausing. Burn some tan lines on the base of the white streak. Then reburn along the dark marking above the brow, and add a bit more color to the right of the marking. With the markings burned in, now add a layer of zigzag burst to the forehead. This patch of fur near the ear is a transition area, so it has a different growth direction than the nearby fur. Make sure to alter your burn direction accordingly. Watch how I merge the two different fur patches together. I start out burning in the direction of the lower patch, and then I alter the direction of the burn to start matching the upper patch. Reburn over the fur patch with the different growth direction near the ear. Then reburn over the cheek area and darken up any markings that may need it. Also, add some short tan lines to the white streaks. There is a darkish line found next to the right edge of the white streak under the eye, so reburn along this area to add that line. Then work your way to the side of the face, adding a layer of zigzags to it. Remember to vary where you start each zigzag burst and to burn it in the growth direction of the fur. Along the right edge of the face, the fur is a touch longer, so increase the length of your burn strokes. I am still burning zigzag strokes, but the lines are longer and fewer in number. Reburn over the side of the face, adding a few dark tan lines here and there in the fur. Add another layer of zigzags to the top of this fur patch, and then continue to burn up to the first marking by the ear. Next, reburn over the nearby area. Burn in the longish tan hairs that curve upward at the base of the ear. Then start to burn in a layer of zigzags on the left side of the ear. Continue to add a layer of zigzags to the left side of the ear. Notice how I left a gap in the upper half of the ear between the burn area and the pencil marks in the center. This was done on purpose, and I recommend you do the same. Burn some tan lines along the top right portion of the ear. Stop burning when you reach the pencil marks on the right side of the ear. Once you reach the pencil marks, then burn to the left of them. Keep the edge along the pencil marks very jagged, as this will create thin, pale lines. Those lines will become the wispy hairs found along the right edge of the ear. Keep your burn in the tan color range. We're building up the area, and it is much easier to fix mistakes if the burn isn't very dark. Erase the pencil marks, but only from the right side of the ear. Use the shader to dot along the left edge of the wispy hairs. This will create short lines to define the hairs. Let's take care of the ear flap. Burn the edge of the ear to a dark brown or black color. Then burn jagged lines along the upper edge of the ear flap fur. Next, darkly burn in the area behind the fur. Continue to work your way around the flap, creating a jagged edge and then darkening up the area behind it. Turn up the heat a little bit on your burner, and then finish reburning along the wispy hairs on the right side of the ear. We're burning in the center of the ear that is dark, but we want those wispy hairs to show up along the edge. Notice how I rotate or angle the pen tip so that I can burn along the top and the bottom of each wispy hair to really define it. Create the tops of the wispy hairs at the bottom of the ear by burning jaggedly along the top of the hair. Create the tops or outer edges of the wispy hairs along the left side of the ear opening. Continue to burn along the top of the wispy ear hairs in the lower part of the ear. Then burn some long tan lines in the lower wispy hairs. Work your way left, burning a jagged line along the edge of the wispy hairs. Burn the area behind the wispy hairs to a dark brown or black color. Now work your way up the ear, creating wispy hairs along the edges of the dark ear opening. Burn the opening to a dark brown or black color. Make sure to vary the length of the wispy hairs. Also vary the direction that they curl in. Vary how much of a curl that they have, and keep a few of the hairs straight. It may be easier for you to draw in the wispy hairs with a white charcoal pencil like we did with the left ear. Every single one of us has to find the method that works best for us. So using a pencil might work well for you. Reburn along the top right portion of the ear. Then burn some semi-long dark tan lines and zigzags in the upper right side of the ear. Connect those with the burn marks along the right edge of the ear and darken up that edge. Burn some dark tan and light brown curving lines near the right edge of the ear. Then burn in short dark lines down the center of the ear following the pencil marks. Notice how I'm changing the angle of the lines as I work my way down the center of the ear. Lines closer to the base or the bottom of the ear tend to curve more than those that are at the top. Burn a few more long lines that gently curve upward along the base of the ear. Then add another layer of zigzags to the left side of the ear. Reburn along the base of the ear, adding more long, gently curving hairs. Well, technically, they are lines. Now burn some short hairs or lines that curve downward. Then burn some zigzags in the area and connect it to the nearby patch. Next, reburn over the patch, adding short dark lines to the area. In some areas, I am just tapping the pen tip to the wood, as a quick tap produces extremely short lines. Along the upper left edge of this patch, I burned a little darker to create a slight marking. Reburn along the top of the head to darken it up. Concentrate on the markings in the area, as some of them are very dark in color. Add some short, dark tan lines or dashes to the fur. Again, I am just tapping the pen tip on the wood to do this. Reburn over the small, thin markings on the brow, and then resume adding short, dark tan lines or dashes to the fur. Only add a few lines on the white markings. Burn some more long tan lines on the wispy hairs found on the bottom of the ear. Next, reburn over the pattern lines on the side of the face. Then reburn over the lower portion of the patch that is near the ear. Add some dark lines to the upper brow markings. Continue to reburn over the brow markings to build up the tonal depth and the darkness level. Add some dark lines on the fur just to the right of the eyebrows. Next, finish adding a layer of zigzags to the side of the face. Darken up the lower right edge of the ear to a tan color. Then burn some tan lines on the ear flap. Continue to burn tan lines on the wispy hairs along the right edge of the ear. Add more tan lines on the wispy hairs at the bottom of the ear. Reburn one more time on the wispy hairs to darken them up. Add some short, dark lines below the wispy hairs. Add another layer of zigzags to the side of the face. Once you're done doing this, most, if not all of the face should have at least one layer of zigzags on it. Work on the dark spot on the side of the face below the ear. Keep the burns in the tan color range as you create the initial fur texture. Add a layer of zigzags to any areas on the face that doesn't have any. Now rework the dark spot to build up the color and texture. Leave a few really pale hairs here and there. Add another layer of zigzags to the right side of the face. When you're working along the edges of the face, burn longer strokes and start creating pale long hairs. Darken up the space behind the hairs to a dark brown or black color. Take your time as you work along the edge of the fur. The process I am using to create the long hairs is the same as what was done on the patch of fur to the right of the face. I am creating new hairs and burning around existing hairs to better define them. Continue to reburn along the side of the face to increase the overall color and tonal depth. In some areas where I have already applied several layers of zigzags, I'm only adding short dark lines to the area. The goal is to get 2 layers of zigzags applied to the side of the face and fine-tune some of the markings on the cheek. Now we're going to do a bit of building up and fine-tuning the fur. First, build up the dark spot below the ear a little more. Then, fine-tune the markings around the eye and the brow by adding a few more short dark lines to them. Next, add some more tan lines on the eyebrow and add a number of lines along the lower edge of the eyebrow. Darken up the top of the brow marking. Then add another layer of short dark lines or dashes to the patch by the ear. Reburn along the base of the ear, adding a few more curving lines. Reburn along the top of the wispy hairs that are along the bottom of the ear. Then slowly work your way down towards the dark spot below the ear. Add a number of short dark lines in this area. Resume the process of creating wispy hairs around the dark opening of the ear. This is done by burning lines to create jagged edges where the wispy hairs are located. There is a little outcropping of wispy hairs that I marked with a yellow circle on the reference photo. Burn above the outcropping to separate it from the rest of the hairs. Then create a jagged edge on the lower side of the outcropping. Burn in more dark lines near the top of the ear. You want the overall color in the area to be in the dark tan to light brown range. Just continue to rework the area, adding more lines to build up the color and texture. Now add another layer of zigzags to the left side of the ear. Burn over the wispy hair outcropping to give it tonal variety. Then resume working on creating the wispy hairs in the upper portion of the ear. I find that I get better results if I work on the hairs for a little bit and then take a break and I work on something else. You may find that it works best just to plow through and get it done. We're all different. If you have any pale areas on the side of the face, then apply zigzags to the area to darken it up. Also, if needed, darken up the markings on the forehead. Again, look at your cat and decide if it has any areas that need to be darkened up. I am reworking the corner of the eye and adding another layer of zigzags to the bridge of the nose. I do not know if your artwork needs to be touched up in the same areas, but I am showing you what I have to do to touch up mine. Create and define more long hairs along the right edge of the face. Take your time as you work in this area. I paused a lot while I was in the process of creating long hairs. I clipped out the numerous pauses to shorten the video, so that is why it seems a little jerky. Keep in mind that this is a very random hair creation process. What I mean by that is no two people will end up with the exact same looking long hairs. If I was to create another bobcat artwork using the same pattern and the same reference photo, I would still have differences between the two different burns. Don't try to replicate the reference photo exactly. That would be time-consuming and not very much fun. Instead, use the reference photo as a guide to help you get the basic details of the bobcat in place. Continue to work your way up the side of the face, creating long hairs along the edge of it. Add some short dark brown lines along the right side at the base of the ear. Then add any missing markings on the side of the face and, if needed, reburn over any pale areas. Work on the dark spot below the ear again. As I said before, I like to work for a little bit on the more complex sections and then take a break. For me, this is a way of burning that works well. You may prefer to work in one area and finish it before moving on, and that's great. We all do things differently. Continue to build up the dark spot below the ear. Also, If needed, apply another layer of zigzags between the dark spot and the nearby patch. Add some more dark dashes to the marking above the eyebrow and in the general brow area. Reburn over the forehead to darken it up. Add more color to the top of the head. Darken up near the top of the ear. Then burn some dark tan lines along the left edge of the ear. Next, burn some short, dark tan lines in the wispy hair area on the upper portion of the ear. Burn on either side of some of the wispy hairs to really define them. Slowly work your way down the ear, emphasizing wispy hairs and darkening up the ear opening. Keep in mind that the ear does not need to match the reference photo exactly. All you need to do is create some random wispy hairs and burn the area behind them to a dark color. This will create the look of an ear opening, and that is all you are after. Add a few more dark lines on the patch, and do the same on the curving hairs at the base of the ear. Add a number of short lines or dashes to the area between the dark spot and the patch near the ear. For the majority of the burn marks, I am just tapping the pen tip to the wood, as this produces an extremely short line. Let's finish up the ear and get done with the bobcat. Start by adding another layer of zigzags to the left side of the ear. Burn in a few short, dark tan lines here and there too. Lightly burn over the wispy hairs near the top of the ear, and continue to darken up along the top portion on the ear and define those wispy hairs. Finish adding the dark short lines along the wispy hairs in the upper portion of the ear, and then, if needed, reburn the left side of the ear. Well, that's it for this tutorial. What did you think about it? Please leave me a comment and let me know. On my website, Pyrography Made Easy, I have a written version of this tutorial along with a free pattern and the reference photo for the bobcat. Plus, there are a lot of other tutorials and patterns available on my website. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next week.